thank you all for coming. I had no idea I had so many friends. This is like the flip side of an artist's life. Most of the time, for most of the year, you spend locked up in your studio. It's a kind of self-confinement. And I know that for myself, I don't let anyone to my studio during the year, not even my wife. It's a place where I escape to. It's like a place where I go in, I say a prayer and hope that a miracle happens. So this is different. This is coming here and putting my paintings up and talking to people, which is not the normal life of an artist. However, it's great to be here and to be talking. Most of you know that I'm from Scotland. From a small town in Troon, which is not much bigger than Blue Hill. And sometimes I feel if I took a rowboat, and set out from Blue Hill and headed straight out across the Atlantic, I would end up in Troon. Now on a clear day, you still can't see Scotland. But sometimes I like to imagine I can. I've been asked, why did I ever become an artist? Why, when you think about it, I've spent over 70 years painting pictures. It doesn't seem normal. It becomes an obsession, and I sometimes wonder, why did I become obsessed with art? And I look back, and it's a long way back. I look back and I think of the first time that I got interested in painting. I remember my parents' house in Scotland had some reproductions on the wall, and that was the case. Most Scottish families had reproductions of great art in the walls. The real paintings were in the whiskey magnates' houses, which I will mention in a moment. But anyhow, I remember in my house, in the living room, we had a reproduction of Rembrandt's Man in Armour. I don't know if you know it, but it's a wonderful painting. And in my bedroom, I had a painting by Van Gogh, one of those sun-drenched landscapes with waving cypress trees. Now, for a young boy, I used to lie in bed and look at this painting, and I realized after a while the painting was like a window, like a magic window. You could crawl through it. You could get in there and you could experience the sunlight and the wind and the things that Van Gogh must have felt when he painted it. Someone once said that art is the only way of running away without leaving your home. And that's what it was for me. It was an escape, and it was a wonderful escape. And I found later that for me, art did that. I could enter into the painting and experience the life of that artist. And I'm sure that is what makes art so appealing to most people. So I started to draw and paint when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I saw some paintings in magazines as well. I didn't see any real art until at high school. There was a whiskey magnate, Johnny Walker, whose house was very close to where we lived in Troon, and I was invited over to look at his collection. And the Walker house had a wonderful collection of contemporary art, the first real art I had seen. And it was so exciting to actually look at art which you realize that other people, an artist had touched, and you could just stare at it in wonderment that you were so close to a creative act. So I got interested in that, and then there was, in 1946, there was an exhibition in Glasgow of Picasso and Matisse, the work they did during the Second World War. And they had this big exhibition in Glasgow, and I went to see it. And it was the most powerful experience of my life. Each painting was like a punch in the guts. it was so powerful. I looked at those paintings and realized that there were ways in which you could capture the mystery and the magic of that you experience in everyday life when you walk by the sea, when you look at things. Here, there was a way of interpreting in this way and really make it forceful. I was bowled over by the exhibition, and when I went back to Troon, I started to paint, and of course, it was a lot easier to paint like Picasso than Rembrandt, so so I thought. So most of the work I did then was pretty far out. So this is a small town, Troon, and the next town, the town of Ayr, which is about the size of Ellsworth here, they had the Ayr Sketch Club, a very respectable sketch club, where most of the members painted flowers, and the adventurous ones painted sunsets. So I joined this club, and me and a fellow artist doing those outrageous, colourful abstractions, which we thought were great. But we did this work, and they had their annual exhibition of the Ayr Sketch Club, and when it was written up by the critic, he called me and my friend les enfants terribles. I have to say that was the nicest thing any critic's ever said about my work. It made me feel really good. And I kept painting in this. I was a very shy rebel. I was shy in those days, but I was rebellious. So there's such a thing as a shy rebel. That's who I was. And I went to, obviously from high school, I went to the Glasgow School of Art. And the Glasgow School of Art, as everybody here probably knows, was a work by the great Scottish architect Rennie Mackintosh. Rennie Mackintosh designed the building and the furniture, the doorknobs, the light fixtures. He designed everything, and it was a truly great work of art. I was not so much aware of that. I was more interested in the girls in my class. But I did later take it all in and realize what a wonderful building it was. I don't know if I learned much, actually, at the Glasgow School of Art. There are one or two things that stick in my mind. I remember once during a life class, the instructor coming up to me, looking at what I was doing, and saying to me, "Would you go up to the model and count her fingers?" Now, I asked him to repeat it. He said, "Go up to the model and count her fingers." Now, for a shy rebel like me, walking up to a naked lady to count her fingers took a lot of guts. But I did. I walked up and I came back and I said to the instructor, "She's got 5 fingers." And he said, "Yes, and you have drawn 6. And I, being very quick-witted in those days, I said, "Well, Chagall painted a self-portrait of himself holding a palette in front of the Eiffel Tower, and he had 6 fingers. He painted himself with 6 fingers." And the instructor said, "Well, when you're as good as Chagall, you can paint 6 fingers." It was then I realized that I was trying to fly before I had wings. And, you know, and that probably was the best lesson I learned from the Glasgow School of Art. When I graduated, in spite of the 6-finger drawings, I graduated in drawing and painting. And at the end of that, when I graduated, I was inducted, conscripted into the Scottish Army, which was 2 years that was a blank. Is a blank, nothing to talk about. But I came back after that, back to Scotland. Scotland in those days, the late 1950s, there was absolutely nothing that an artist could live on. There were very few galleries. No one ever bought paintings. And I remember that time. Glasgow had trams that used to rattle along lines, electric lines, and they would shake and rattle along the streets. You could jump on and jump off without paying. And it was one of the tram drivers used to have dinner once a week, free dinner for all the starving artists in the city. And I didn't go because I was a student and the government paid for it. So it paid my way for everything. So I did not have to go there and have spaghetti. But anyway, that was the way it was in Glasgow. And I realized there was no way to stay there. It wasn't, for an artist, there was no appreciation and there was no venue for showing your work. So I left for London. And then I spent 10 years in London after that. I spent most of the time painting, living from hand to mouth, because I did not want to take a steady job. It would interfere with my work. I did work occasionally, but most of the time I was painting. I did exhibit in several good galleries, but very, very little sold. Even in London, it wasn't all that much different from Glasgow. This was the early 60s, and there were very, very few sales. You know, occasionally I was selling painting, but almost never. And the best part was that you had a very interesting community of artists who always met in Soho in the evening, London Soho in the evening, and they always gathered at the watering holes, at the French pub and other pubs. And for some reason, all those penniless artists always managed to get drunk at the end of the evening. I've never understood why. I kind of put it down to the mystery of art. But my life changed in London when one day I met an American girl, not my present wife, because my late wife died, but I met this American girl. And it was that time, I think, when there were movies like American in Paris had come out, and Hemingway's novels like Sun Also Rises, and there were stories and movies about young American wealthy women coming to Europe for romance and marrying either a prince or a pauper. Well, this American girl was not an heiress, but she did have a day job. And anyhow, we fell in love, we got married, and I settled down more at that time. And we were quite happy in London until she got a newspaper sent from the States, and in this one newspaper, it mentioned an ad for a farm in Maine with 100 acres for $4,000. Now, we were living in a bedsitter, which is about 20 feet by 20 feet. So 100 acres, that really was something wonderful. So we thought, well, we'll just pack up everything and leave. So we did. She was working, at this time, she was working for the American government, and I was doing the odd teaching job, but we left anyhow, and we came to the United States to look at this wonderful 100 acres with a farm in Maine. Turned out it was in Skowhegan, outside Skowhegan, and it was April and the snow was on the ground. And the house was falling apart. And we realized this was not our ideal, this was not the dream we had. So we headed for the coast, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, but we ended up at Millbridge, which in Washington County. And we went to the hardware store and asked if there was anywhere to rent, and she said, yeah, I have a house on an A-frame on the water at Tom Layton Point, so we went there. And it turned out that it was, I think, the best summer Maine has ever had. There was 4 months of constant sun, and I just absolutely wondered, why did I ever spend so much time in London? And I was never going back to Scotland. Here was paradise. On the water, sunlight every day, lobster boats churning offshore, and seagulls crying in the morning. You couldn't ask for anything more. So anyhow, we stayed in Millbridge for the summer, and then in the winter, because it was an A-frame, we had to leave. We went to Cherryfield, and we stayed in Cherryfield during the winter. That wasn't so pleasant, but anyway, we moved to Blue Hill. Eventually moved to Blue Hill, and I have never left Maine since, and that was over 45 years ago. Anyhow, not quite sure where I am and where I'm talking. Where am I? Well, coming to Maine had quite a profound effect on my painting. When I was in London and I was exhibiting in London, most of my work was abstract. I think the majority of abstract painters must live in cities. I really do. I think they live in cities. Because when you get into the countryside, the landscape, the sense of place becomes such a powerful influence that abstraction tends to get more and more into the background. And I found that what I wanted to do was to fuse abstraction with this sense of place, to keep the identity of what I loved, what I saw, but yet use the abstraction to strengthen it, to express it, to fuse the two, to fuse abstraction and realism. A very difficult thing to do, and other artists have tried to do this as well. Some of them successfully, some not. But this is what I was trying to do when I saw how wonderful the Maine coast was, the green of the forests. Everything was, and the white houses. Now, I loved the white houses I saw in Maine. They looked like plants growing out of the soil. Some of them developed bumps, you know, additions. Then there was dormers suddenly would appear. And this little simple white house would start growing in all directions. It was just like a plant growing from its roots. But I loved those white houses. So that is really how when I came to Maine and how I felt when I came to Maine. Let me talk a little bit about the process of my painting. I think when they say the hardest thing about doing a painting is starting it. And I think that's true. And I think that starting a painting is difficult because you go about it in a roundabout way. There is a little idea or something like that buzzing at the back of your mind. It begins to irritate you for a while until at some point the anxiety becomes almost unbearable and you have to do something about it. I would go into my studio with a cup of tea to calm my nerves. I'd go into my studio and I would start sketching. Not any particular idea. I would start to sketch to try to refine and develop an image that somehow or other had some relationship to this feeling which I was experiencing. Difficult to explain, but that is how I would start. I would sketch and sketch and sketch, and finally a direction would appear from the sketcher. I would be pointed in one particular direction, and I would put up the canvas on the easel and I would begin. Now, it's been said that the act of creation begins with the act of destruction, and I think that is true, and let me explain. The intellect will guide you to a certain point in a painting. The mind will guide you to a certain point. You will put in the shapes, the lines, the images, and so on, in a most considered fashion. But at some point, in order for your soul to get into that painting, in order for your emotions to start working on it, you have to push the mind aside and let your emotions take over. I think that's what it means by the act of destruction. You have to destroy in order to create. And I found that when I paint, I find that it's necessary at some point to take the image which I have, remove it completely, and start all over again. And I do this over a series of phases until at some point, if I'm lucky, or if I get there, at some point the painting will jump up and become alive. it'll start breathing itself. It's got its own personality. Then I know I've done it and I've got a painting here. If you were to just paint with the mind alone, you would end up with perhaps a very, very pretty picture. But you would end up with a beautiful corpse. Because I think that what happens is that you have to put your soul into a painting if it's going to be a great, and I'm talking about great art, not necessarily my own art. I'm talking objectively. Great art is where the soul of the artist is encompassed. I can walk into a gallery, and I'm sure you can, I can see from the other end of the gallery, say, oh look, there's a Marsden Hartley, oh look, there's a John Martin. Because, and it's not because of the way they painted, you don't look at their brush strokes or their colours, it's their personality, it's their life that comes from those paintings. And that's what makes it all so wonderful. There was a British art critic went to see George Braque one day, and there was a painting in his easel, a wonderful painting that this art critic thought was just absolutely great, loved it. And he went away, came back 2 weeks later, and he saw this painting on leaning against the wall. And it was different. He said to Braque, this painting, what did you do to it? It was perfect. And Braque said, it was too easy on the eye. And what he often did, when things were a little bit too perfect, he would alter it in what Braque called a rupture. He would rupture the flow of the painting, because that little human error became necessary in a painting. Perfection was not what he was after. Another, mentioning Braque, the process of destruction and recreation, he said an interesting thing, and that was someone else came to visit, and there was a painting there of two birds, and this person said, oh, what a wonderful two birds you've painted there, I love it. Braque said, I didn't paint them, they were born there. And I think that does explain, there's a lot of artist quotes and things like that they can get away with a lot of rubbish, but I think but I think those two things are actually very important. But that is the getting down more to my own way of working, my own techniques. I often paint with paper towels. What I do is I roll them up and crush them, and I dab them in paint, and I paint like a paintbrush, only I use a paper towel. The reason why I do that is that I have found I am too impatient to have to wait overnight or 2 or 3 nights for a painting to dry. And I find that this method I developed, I could put one layer of color on top of another layer of color without smudging the layer underneath it. So I can work and complete a painting, or almost complete a painting, at one sitting, or standing. I never sit, I stand. But I do it all at one time. And the paper towel allows me to do that. It has to be a particular type of paper towel. It has to be a particular make. And strangely enough, it's Scott paper towels. That has nothing to do with me as a Scot. But the Scott paper towels are the cheapest on the market. And I found that they're the cheapest because they don't absorb nearly so well as the better towels. So I don't want too much absorption. So they are just perfect for painting with. At the end of a painting, if I get what I want and it's all dry, it'll dry. But I do go back to it a little bit when I have to, especially to sign my name at the bottom. But I do have to go back to it with a brush and tidy it up a little bit. But I don't really change it radically because I don't want to ruin the initial effect. Sometimes I use trowel. A palette knife. Sometimes I use a palette knife. And for the same reason, because with a palette knife you can work fast and you do not smudge the colors that are underneath. So that's the only reason I use a palette knife, actually. I prefer it. I do occasionally use a brush, and you know, this one here actually is done with a brush. The drifting. And sometimes I mix wax in the color. That is to try to give it a certain kind of translucence. It changes the color slightly, but it's a rather nice look when you mix it. It doesn't always translate on the canvas, but it looks great when you mix it. So that's what I do with that. Let me see what I am here. Oh, getting on here. I better not talk too long here. So anyhow, let me very quickly. I do a lot of seascapes. That's natural because I live by the ocean, and I see the moods and the effect of the weather, the effect of light on the ocean, and I walk there every day, and so the ocean has a big impact on me. And with all the movement and the tides and everything, there is a structure there lying beneath everything, and it's that structure which I try to uncover. The structure will give a permanence to a fleeting mood or a fleeting moment. Sometimes I do still lifes, like this one here, because by walking by the edge of the sea, I pick up things like rubber gloves and bait bags and shells and things like that. And I collected all those things and lying around the house, and suddenly I realized I should be putting them together, because painting has a lot to do with composition. And the putting together of things is such an intriguing exercise for a painter, to put them together to be more meaningful and in some way structurally correct. Most still lifes, many still lifes I see, have unrelated objects, which bothers me sometimes. You know, even Picasso, they'll put a mandolin alongside a skull, you know, or some, you know. And I like to have things which relate to one another, as in seascapes. And in this one here, actually, the effect of the moon gave to me, going on the beach and shining things, the movement of the shadows gave to me a feeling of mystery. And I thought of those magicians' tables where they have objects that lying out, and at any moment something miraculous was going to happen. And when I was painting this particular still life, I was thinking about a magician's table. The other things I often do are those white houses, and they're a bit like those. Well, they always inhabit a place in my mind, because for 40 years, the houses and their inhabitants keep coming out. It's a bit like those Swiss weather houses, where little figures come out to tell you the weather. But my little figures come out only when it's sunny. And what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to capture that moment of magic when you appear after a long winter. The lady comes out after a long winter, perhaps clutching a bunch of forsythia, because forsythia is the first plant to bloom in Maine. And there's that wonderful moment when winter is over and you step into a spring morning. And it was that feeling that I wanted to capture. And it's the same with it could be a girl with a bird cage, and this one here, bringing the bird out into the air after a long winter, and to be with the seagull, that sense of freedom. And this one here, the kiss. One of my favorite paintings when I was a boy was there was a Giotto painting of St. Francis preaching to the birds. An absolutely wonderful painting where there was a sense of the miracle, of something miraculous happening in a very simple setting. He is standing there with the birds at his feet, and the stillness and the beauty and the reverence of the whole scene captivated me. And that has stayed with me, and often when I paint, this feeling that I got from that Giotto stays with me. And in this painting here, though I am not comparing it to Giotto, but I am, in a sense, it was a moment of a union of two people, a moment of reverence. And the only witnesses are the gulls who are paying no attention to this. It is just a wonderful sense of a moment of something happening which is beautiful, still, and private. And that's what I was trying to do on that particular painting. Now, just let me say that what I've been talking about here more than anything else, I've been trying to explain the unexplainable. The great thing about art is its mystery. You know, Mona Lisa's smile, Van Gogh's Starry Night, Fra Angelico's Angels, Munch's Scream. And I think about that last painting done by Gauguin. That painting he did in Tahiti, a very large painting. And he gave it the title, Where Did We Come From? Who are we, and where are we going? That, to me, that's the mystery of life, and it's the mystery of art together.